So you've seen Amanda on our channel before probably, but you're gonna see Amanda a little more when we're working on her shop. And today she's gonna be using the laser, the rod eye, to help me establish grade to the bottom of the dig, the footing dig around the perimeter, because we've got the subgrade in. And now it's time to sort of create the footing space for the monolithic pour footings to run down in there. And when you're sitting on a machine, you need somebody on the ground keeping track of what's happening. And that's her today. Right now, you're watching me begin to make a mistake with this excavator that's going to cost Ben and Amanda about 5 extra yards of concrete in these footings. What's going on is this. When I bought this machine, I bought a 12-inch, a 24-inch, and a 36-inch bucket to go with it. And I'm digging these footings with the 24-incher. The yellow paint line is 6 inches outside of the building line, and I'm following it pretty carefully. But I should have moved that yellow line out to maybe 10 or 12 inches outside of paint line, because by the time the edges of this ditch unravel and get knocked down, these footings have gotten way, way bigger than what was called out on the plans. But bottom line is this: it's almost never a loss to overkill your foundation, because stronger is better, and these footings are going to be strong. So you've watched us spend a lot of time compacting this site. The structural fill that we put in here, a little bit of the native that's underneath just a skiff of the structural fill in the bottom of some of these footings, but most of it is on a good amount of structural fill, which is a known material that will compact up to, like, 95, 96% compaction. We've used a little double drum roller. Ben's become a master at running that back and forth up here. We used it around the perimeter to make sure everything was hard before we dug it. And now we've got this miserable jumping jack or whacker running in the bottom of the footings to tighten back up the disruption that was caused by the digging. So we have Abraham and Asa. They're taking turns putting the water on because moisture is important. Ben is getting a computer man's exposure to some of the grittier parts of construction. A jumping jack will shake the beans out of you. But I've got a great crew, and here in about an hour we're going to have the bottom of this hard enough to start hanging boards. So Ben, you've just endured probably 20 minutes of jumping jack action down on your very own footings. And tell me, what are your impressions, Ben? How do you feel?
Every muscle is tingling, and I actually can't feel with my fingertips right now. I took a hit on the knee at one point, and it felt like barely controlled chaos.
It was. That's construction, right? So one of the things I love about this guy is he doesn't mind if I tease him a little bit. But it was fun to watch him. I could see his learning curve flattening out as he began to understand that he actually could control this, 4-stroke beast on the end of a pogo stick. So how do you feel about the compaction in the bottom of these things?
The compaction everywhere around the whole perimeter is pretty good, except this corner. It's mostly mud, and it just sinks in.
Yeah.
Oh.
It's called pumping. When the non-structural fill is too wet, and then the load is applied and taken off, it pumps. And that's not great, but it tightens up over there, and we'll throw a little material in there and pat it again. And
perfect.
And the footing is so over-designed. I mean, it's going to be so incredibly strong. If there was nothing underneath that 6 feet, the building wouldn't know the difference. In fact, as good luck would have it, that's underneath the French door.
There you go.
So how bad can it be?
Yep.
Anyhow, I got to tell you, and all you father-in-laws can just envy my position of being able to school this boy and have him actually take it. Right now is when it becomes important that your batter boards were right when you set them up, and that they have survived the excavation process and are still right. So I'm going to throw these string lines up, pull the diagonals, make sure the dimensions are still good before we start hanging boards. Where we're at now is we're going to check the diagonals from the intersection of these lines. That's awfully low for some reason, got to check that. And we'll make sure they're close enough to set boards. Well, it's taken maybe 2 weeks, at a fairly laid-back pace, because we're enjoying this job so much, to get the dirt work done and the ditches dug and everything compacted and the material on site. Staging is always the biggest part of any job. But at long last, it's time to start hanging some boards. So I've got some 2x12s. They cost, I don't even want to tell you how much they cost. They were expensive. We'll get lots of uses out of them before they're finally relegated to the wood stove. but I get to hang them by myself because that is one good way to do it. I've got a dot right here. I know the board needs to come at least that far. I'm going to take this beautiful stake and I'm going to set it, letting gravity pull it straight down to where it's about 1.5 inches away from the string. And if it looks good, it is good. There is 1.5 inches. I'm going to drive it down. So the beauty of starting your stakes and your board high is that now, with it more or less in place, you can bring it down to the line. And with two ends undetermined, leave your first end a little high, clear your line. Pretty good. We'll go ahead and put a kicker on here. All right, we now have a base of operations, right? I mean, that's pretty sturdy. So you can start with the board that is secure to suspend one end of the board you're hanging, and it gets a lot easier. So I'm going to be looking for a chance through this whole project to sort of point out all the opportunities there are to do things with a crew of one. Because there is no more efficient crew than one guy who knows how to work. There's an Army Corps of Engineers statistic that says, and I believe, that every time you double your crew size, you lose 20% in efficiency. Now, I'm not sure that always works from 1 to 2, because there are some jobs you just can't do by yourself, but there are not many of those jobs. And in this particular case, hanging a 20-foot 2x12 by oneself seems impossible, right? Well, it's not. With a concrete stake and some nails, you can put this thing up and move right along at a good rate all by yourself, like this. You take a 16-penny duplex and you put it in the end of the board, oh, maybe 1 inch from the top. And this is a heavy board, so drive it in pretty good. And then carefully hang it off that nail on that board that you just put in position. See that? Now your board is held. And you don't have to pay a guy to stand there and hold it while you walk down to nail the other end. Like that. One man, big board, no problem. This is a turnbuckle. It's a great tool. I wish they would drill holes right out at the very corner, but they don't. So I'm going to set this like this. Keep it down out of the finisher's way. I'm going to stake it down out there, and we've got something we can work off of. So here's the hanger nail that I drove in to hang the end of this 16-footer so I could walk down there. Sometimes getting them out's a little painful, sometimes it's very easy. I've got this stake in here for a cleat that's going to be ready to receive it when I get my ducks in a row. Like that. I can set that height nice. Go down and bring the other end down to grade. Hang it up. Now, much like hanging the board a little high and tapping the stake down, you can nail the kicker with the board a little proud and drive it back. Like that. So this works great. Hanging a board, you know, by yourself with a hanger nail at the end, and then quickly and carefully nailing it to a stake that you have in position at the other end. But you've got to be careful, because half the weight of the board is pushing down on that stake, or in this case, 2 stakes. But the vibration of nailing can cause it to settle down to a lower grade than you wanted. And don't forget to push the board endo back against the place that it is hung, because the hanger nail originates with an open gap at the top of the 2 boards that needs to be closed up before everything comes to rest. So before I hang this board up on the hanger nail, I've just got to show you the grain on this, and I have to acknowledge how lucky I am to live in the Pacific Northwest where lumber like this is available. And also acknowledge that we whine because we think that lumber quality has degraded, and it has, but man, there are still some great boards around here. Look at this perfect slab grain on this kiln-dried, 20-foot long 2x12. Look at this. Now that's not super tight grain, but it is, you know, it's 9 or 10 growth rings per inch and probably 13 or 14 growth rings per inch right in here. Just beautiful slab grain, which is pretty darn stable in a kiln-dried board. So I'm going to mark the batter board, the string on the form. I'm going to drop it down onto the hanger nail, about like that. Go down to the other end and put it on the stakes. So what we're going to do now is called underpinning. This 2x12 is way up off of the dirt, especially down there where to get below frost, we've got, you know, 14, 15 inches below the bottom of the form to the dirt. Got to plug that up. So I'm going to plug it up with 2x6s. I'm going to start with one right here, go all the way around with one, and then come back and double up in the areas where I need it. This is easy. It's just a matter of slamming the board in, putting the nails in it, and moving forward. So the beauty of underpinning is you're down in the dirt where it doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter if it's all the way back against the stakes. It doesn't really matter if it's all the way up against the board above it, because it's all buried. All you're doing is saving yourself some concrete and trying to keep from casting your stakes into the footing. But in the same way that the beauty of so many other advantages is also its curse, I mean, our weakness is always hiding inside of our strength, right? And so even though it's down there and doesn't matter, it's often really hard to nail or tack or fasten that bottom piece of underpinning in because the edge of the trench is right there. But what you can do to save the situation is drive a nail alongside the stake and clinch it. Because remember, all that has to happen is that thing has to remain there until the mud captures it. Now, can you see that this underpinning simply has to be here? It doesn't really have to be anywhere else. Even if it's like that, it just has to be against the stake. So I could perhaps start that nail and drive it like this, but that's pretty much like milking a mouse, right? So what you can do is just start the nail alongside at an angle and just clinch it so the board doesn't fall out. And then if you want to kick some rocks under it to keep it there, do that 4 or 5 times. And it'll stay there until the mud shows up. Well, the forms are up. There's a lot of detailing, more stakes to put in, cleats across joints, kickers and turnbuckles, and lots of work. But what I have to do right now before any more sunshine bears down on these boards is put some form oil on them. So the form oil is going to do 2 or 3 things. I don't know what brand this is, whatever it is. It is, for me, first, it is slowing up the damage that the sun's going to do to these boards, because I've got $600 worth of form lumber on these stakes. It's unbelievable, but it's the world we live in. And the longer it sits in the sun, it tends to curl and cup and crack, and even though it's kiln dried, it just doesn't like the sun. So I'm going to saturate it with form oil to protect it from that damage and to make it really hard for the concrete to stick to it when we pour it here in probably 10 days, no faster than I'm working. Well, I just put about 1.5 gallons of this form oil on these boards. And I guess the form oil costs 5 times, about $13 a gallon, so 20 bucks, $20 worth of form oil. If it extends the life of these forms by 1/3 or 1/4, or, you know, when you spend $600 on a handful of boards, you want to take care of them if you can. This stuff is not near as stinky as, you know, some guys mix diesel and crankcase oil. That's an ugly, stinky, miserable thing to work with. It'll do a similar benefit to the lumber, but it's really hard on your hands. I mean, your employees, they're covered with that stench and whatever the health hazard is. So I recommend it. Buy some form oil. Make your boards happy. So there are 4 corners in this simple little building. You watched me set these boards up, but let me explain to you why one of the corners is batter boarded about right and the other 3 are almost fatally compromised, but had to I had to do what I had to do. You can see here why the batter boards have to be set exactly to the same height as a finished floor. It's because not only do these strings tell me where the edge of the concrete is, but I have confidence setting the board to comply with the elevation of the string. You can see that I had plenty of room to dig here. See, the backhoe did the digging without wrecking the batter boards. In order to do that, the rule of thumb is you need at least 5 feet between the building line and the batter board. I've got about 6 feet on this side. Plenty of distance. Please disregard this round stake. I have no idea how that happened. But there's lots of room for working and going back and forth and getting a machine around there. On this side, I've probably got, what's that, 40 inches or 4 feet. That's enough. So this one this was the only one that had to be torn out and put back in before I could set the building up. And it was right here. This board came across right here, but it was just too close for compaction and access and tearing out asphalt. It just didn't work. So I got back to 5 feet, finally. Worked great. And I couldn't get back any further because the hillside's intruding at the grade, and who cares? It was close, we got it done. But I'm just driving home the point that put your batter boards well outside of your building line. The next episode is going to concentrate on one of the aspects of construction that I avoid whenever possible, and that's plumbing. Specifically, the under-slab waste and vent lines for a toilet, a sink, and a shower. It's a darn good thing that I can call Phil Rokas to keep me out of too much trouble. Thanks for watching Essential Craftsman, and keep up the good work.